Your Honor, before you finalize anything, I need to speak. The voice cut through the courtroom like a blade, clear, steady, completely out of place. Every head turned at once. The judge paused mid-sentence, her pen hovering above the final page of a divorce settlement that was seconds away from being signed. This was supposed to be routine, a clean ending to a 22-year marriage. Papers signed, assets divided, lives separated. No drama, no surprises. But now, there was an 18-year-old boy standing at the back of the room. Brennan Ashworth. My son, he wasn't supposed to be here. Not like this. He had turned 18 just 3 weeks earlier, the same day his mother had handed me divorce papers, with a smile that still didn't make sense to me. A smile that said she had already won. And until this moment, I believed she had. Sir, Judge Whitmore said, her tone measured but firm, this is a private proceeding. You'll need to identify yourself. Brennan didn't hesitate. My name is Brennan Ashworth. The respondent is my father. The petitioner is my mother. A ripple of confusion spread across the room. His mother Genevieve shifted sharply in her seat at the petitioner's table, her lawyer leaning in as if to contain the situation before it spiraled. Brennan, sit down, she snapped under her breath, her voice tight with something I had never heard from her before. Not anger, not exactly. Something closer to fear. This doesn't concern you. But he didn't move. Actually, he said calmly, stepping forward into the aisle, it concerns me more than anyone. There was something different about him. Not just the confidence, but the certainty. This wasn't a teenager acting on impulse. This was someone who had already thought 10 steps ahead. Someone who had been waiting for this exact moment. Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly, studying him now with interest instead of dismissal. Young man, you're interrupting a legal proceeding. You'd better have a very good reason. Brennan reached into his pocket. For a split second, the room held its breath. When his hand came back out, he wasn't holding papers or notes or anything you would expect in a courtroom. He was holding something small, simple, a digital recorder. I do, Your Honor, he said. I have evidence. The word landed harder than anything else that had been said. Evidence. Not opinion, not accusation. Evidence. Genevieve stood up so quickly her chair scraped loudly against the floor. No, she said, louder now, her composure slipping for the first time. This is inappropriate. Whatever he thinks he has... I don't think, Brennan interrupted, his voice still calm, still controlled. I know. He looked at her then not as a son looking at his mother, but as someone confronting a truth that had already been decided. For the past 3 years, he continued, lifting the recorder slightly, I've been documenting conversations in our home, conversations my mother had when she believed no one was listening. The courtroom went completely silent. Even the air seemed to still. Those recordings, Brennan said, contain proof of fraud, infidelity, and a coordinated plan to strip my father of everything he owns. No one moved. No one spoke. Across the room, Genevieve's face drained of color. Her lawyer began speaking rapidly, objections forming before the full weight of the statement could settle, but it was too late. The moment had already shifted. This was no longer a routine divorce hearing. This was something else entirely. And whatever Brennan was about to reveal was going to destroy everything. Brennan held the small device up just enough for everyone to see it, clearly a plain digital recorder, the kind no one would look at twice. But in that moment, it carried more weight than any stack of legal documents on the judge's bench. It wasn't impressive. It wasn't dramatic. And yet, somehow, it changed everything. Your Honor, he said, his voice steady, controlled in a way that didn't belong to someone his age, this recorder contains over 3 years of conversations, recorded inside my home. Conversations my mother had when she believed she was alone, or when she believed no one was paying attention. A murmur moved through the room, subtle but undeniable. Judge Whitmore's expression shifted from curiosity to focus. You're claiming these recordings are relevant to the matter before the court? Yes, ma'am, Brennan replied without hesitation. They directly contradict the claims made in this divorce proceeding. And they prove intent, premeditated intent, to commit fraud against my father, and mislead this court. Genevieve's composure fractured. This is absurd, she snapped, rising to her feet. He's a child. He doesn't understand what he's saying. Whatever he recorded, if he recorded anything at all, it's been taken out of context. Sit down, Mrs. Ashworth. the judge said sharply, her tone cutting through the tension. Then she looked back at Brennan. You need to be very careful with what you're alleging. Do you understand the seriousness of this? I do, he said. That's why I waited until now. That answer landed harder than anything else. Waited. This wasn't a spontaneous outburst. This was planned, deliberate. Dominique Pryor, Genevieve's attorney, stood smoothly, her voice precise and controlled. Your Honor, I must object. We have no foundation for these so-called recordings. We don't know how they were obtained, whether they've been altered, or whether they're even admissible under state law. Brennan didn't look at her. He kept his eyes on the judge. Tennessee is a one-party consent state, he said. I was present in these conversations. I had the legal right to record them. A brief silence followed. Not uncertainty calculation. Judge Whitmore leaned back slightly, considering. All right, she said finally. Given the nature of these claims, I'm willing to hear a brief portion before making a determination on admissibility. Genevieve's head snapped toward the bench. Your Honor, that will be enough, Mrs. Ashworth. The room went still again. Brennan lowered his gaze to the recorder, his thumb hovering over the button. For the first time, there was the faintest pause, not hesitation, but wait. 3 years of silence, of watching, of waiting, all leading to this single moment. Then he pressed play. At first, there was only static. A faint background hum, the ordinary sound of a device capturing something never meant to be heard. And then her voice. Clear, unmistakable. I moved another 20,000 this month, Genevieve said casually, almost bored. He never checks the accounts. Duncan works like a machine. He has no idea where any of it goes. The words hung in the air like a shockwave. No one spoke, no one breathed. That's just the beginning, Brennan said quietly, his eyes still fixed on the judge. There are recordings of her discussing an ongoing affair, recordings of her transferring money into hidden accounts, and recordings of her planning to accuse my father of abuse with fabricated evidence so she can take everything in this divorce. The courtroom shifted from silence to something heavier, something charged, irreversible. Genevieve shook her head rapidly, her voice rising. That's not true. That's not what that conversation meant. He's twisting. Then we can play the rest, Brennan said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. Because by then, the damage was already done. The first crack had appeared, and everyone in that room understood the same thing at the exact same moment. Whatever was on that recorder was about to destroy her. My name is Duncan Ashworth. I'm 51 years old, and until recently, I believed I had lived a simple, honest life. I worked as a mechanical engineer in Chattanooga, Tennessee, for over 2 decades. Steady work, long hours, nothing glamorous, but enough to build something solid, a house, a family, a future I thought was secure. I met Genevieve Trask in 1999 at a friend's wedding. She was 23, then confident, charming, the kind of person who could light up a room without trying. I was 26, just starting to find my footing in my career. We dated, we built something together, and in 2001, we got married. Back then, everything felt real, or at least, I believed it was. The early years were what most people would call normal. We bought a house in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where people wave from their driveways and kids ride bikes in the evenings. When our son Brennan was born in 2005, Genevieve decided she wanted to stay home with him, and I made that work. I took on extra hours, accepted more responsibility at work, did whatever was necessary to provide the life we had agreed on. It wasn't always easy, but I never questioned it. That was my role, my responsibility, and I truly believed, that it mattered. As Brennan grew older, so did our expenses. Private school tuition, activities, the kind of opportunities we both said we wanted for him. Genevieve managed the household, and I trusted her completely. I didn't monitor accounts. I didn't question purchases. If something seemed off, I assumed there was a reasonable explanation. That's what trust looks like, when you don't realize it can be exploited. Looking back now, the signs were there long before I allowed myself to see them. Around 2016, something shifted. It wasn't obvious at first, just small changes. Genevieve began going out more frequently, dinners with friends that ran later than usual, phone calls she would take in another room. When I walked in, Conversations would end too quickly. Screens would turn away. There were new clothes I didn't remember seeing before, purchases that didn't match the patterns I had grown used to. But every time something felt slightly off, I dismissed it. 17 years of marriage teaches you to trust patterns, not question them. Or at least, that's what I told myself. What I didn't know, what I couldn't have imagined at the time, was that 2016 wasn't just a year of small changes. It was the beginning of something else entirely. That was when the affair started. Not a momentary lapse or a mistake that spiraled out of control, but a deliberate choice that continued, quietly, for years. His name was Marshall Kendrick, a partner at the law firm where Genevieve had once worked. They reconnected, they talked, and then they crossed a line that, as it turned out, meant nothing to her. And it didn't stop there. While I was working longer hours, believing I was supporting my family, she was building something behind my back. Not just a relationship, but a system. Money began moving in ways I didn't see. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. Transfers from joint accounts, withdrawals from savings, credit cards opened in my name without my knowledge, documents signed that I never read carefully enough or in some cases never saw at all. Over time, those amounts grew into something staggering, hundreds of thousands of dollars. It wasn't random, it wasn't reckless, it was controlled. Every decision had a purpose. Every step moved her closer to something she had been planning long before I ever realized there was a problem. She wasn't just living a double life, she was preparing an exit, one that would leave me with nothing. The hardest part to accept wasn't just what she had done, it was how long she had been doing it. Years of shared routines, conversations, moments I thought meant something, all existing alongside a reality I couldn't see. Trust, I realized too late, hadn't just been broken. It had been used, carefully, intentionally. And by the time the truth finally surfaced, the life I thought I had built was already gone. The first time something felt wrong, I didn't call it suspicion. I called it stress or timing, or anything that would allow me to keep believing my life was still intact. It was sometime in late 2018 when I came home earlier than usual, a rare break in a routine that had become predictable over the years. The house was quiet, but not empty. I could hear Genevieve upstairs, her voice low, measured different from the way she spoke when she knew I was around. As I stepped into the bedroom, the conversation ended abruptly, too abruptly. She turned toward me with a smile that arrived just a second too late. "Who was that?" I asked. "My sister," she replied without hesitation. But her sister lived in Oregon, and we had caller ID. The number on her phone didn't match. It was a small moment. Easy to dismiss. And that's exactly what I did. After nearly 2 decades of marriage, you don't jump to conclusions over something like that. You tell yourself there's an explanation. You tell yourself you're overthinking. Because the alternative, the idea that something deeper is wrong, is far more difficult to face. But once a question exists, it doesn't disappear. It lingers, quiet at first, then louder each time something doesn't quite align. Over the following months, the patterns began to shift in ways I couldn't fully ignore. Genevieve started going out more often, always with vague explanations. Dinner with friends. A late meeting. Just needed some time. None of it was unreasonable on its own, but together, it created a rhythm that felt unfamiliar. She became more protective of her phone, angling the screen away when she typed, stepping into another room to answer calls. Conversations that used to be open became shorter, more controlled, as if certain topics were now off limits without being explicitly defined. There were financial details, too subtle at first. Purchases I didn't remember discussing, statements I didn't look at closely enough. I had always trusted her to manage those things. That trust made it easy not to notice when something changed. And even when I did notice, I didn't act on it. I told myself it wasn't worth turning into a problem. That trust meant not questioning everything. That marriage meant believing the best, even when something felt off. Looking back now, what strikes me most isn't just the behavior, it's my response to it, or lack of one. I wasn't blind. I saw the inconsistencies. I felt the distance growing between us. But I chose not to follow it to its conclusion, because doing so would have required me to accept something I wasn't ready to accept, that the person I had built my life with might not be who I believed she was. What I didn't know at the time was that these weren't isolated changes. They were part of something much larger, something far more calculated than I could have imagined. While I was dismissing late nights and unexplained expenses, she was already planning the next phase. Not just leaving, but controlling how she left. The truth, as it would later come out, was far worse than infidelity. It wasn't just about betrayal, it was about strategy. She had begun laying the groundwork for a version of events that would cast her as the victim and me as the problem. False narratives, carefully constructed. Conversations rehearsed. Even fabricated evidence, medical records, designed to support claims of abuse that never happened. Statements from people willing to say what needed to be said if it meant securing her outcome. At the time, I had no idea any of that existed. I only knew that something felt off, and I chose not to look too closely. That was my mistake. Not trusting her, but trusting without question. Because the signs were there. Not loud, not obvious, but real. And every time I ignored one, I made it easier for the truth to stay hidden just a little bit longer. Brennan didn't discover the truth in a single moment. It unfolded slowly, the way most painful truths do, revealing itself in fragments he wasn't old enough to fully understand at the time. He was 12 when it started, coming home early from school one afternoon, sick and exhausted, expecting nothing more than a quiet house and a chance to rest. Instead, he heard voices coming from the master bedroom, his mother's voice and a man's, not his father. That was the moment something shifted, even if he couldn't yet define it. He didn't confront her. He didn't tell me. At that age, he didn't know what to do with what he had heard. So he did the only thing he could. He paid attention. At first, he tried to convince himself it was nothing, a misunderstanding, a one-time mistake that would correct itself. But it didn't. The patterns continued. The late calls, the hushed conversations, the sudden silences when he entered a room. Unlike me, Brennan didn't dismiss them. He didn't have years of trust clouding his judgment. What he had instead was curiosity, and eventually, concern. By the time he was 15, that concern had turned into something more deliberate. He began documenting what he was seeing, what he was hearing. It started with his phone, left quietly in rooms where conversations happened when his mother believed she was alone. At first, the recordings were inconsistent, unclear, pieces of dialogue without full context. But over time, Brennan refined the process. He bought a small digital recorder, simple, easy to hide, reliable. He learned where to place it, when to use it, how to avoid detection. What began as curiosity became method, and with that method came clarity. The recordings didn't just confirm his suspicions, they expanded them. Conversations with a man named Marshall, discussions about money, about accounts, about plans that extended far beyond an affair. Brennan began organizing everything, labeling files by date, time, context, building something that looked less like a collection of recordings and more like a case. But the most remarkable part wasn't the evidence. It was the restraint. For 3 years, Brennan carried this knowledge alone. He watched his mother sit across from me at dinner, speak casually, laugh, move through our lives as if nothing was wrong, while knowing exactly what she was doing behind the scenes. He watched me continue to trust her, continue to provide, continue to believe that our family was intact, and he said nothing, not because he didn't care, but because he understood something I didn't, that truth without proof wouldn't be enough. He had considered telling me. He admitted that later. There were moments when the weight of it all became almost unbearable, when keeping the secret felt worse than exposing it. But every time he imagined what would happen, the outcome was the same. I would confront her. She would deny everything. And without evidence, it would become a matter of perception, not fact. She would control the narrative. She always had. So he waited. He waited until he turned 18. Until he could speak as an adult, not a child whose words could be dismissed or reframed. Until the timing aligned with something he knew was coming, the divorce she had been planning long before I realized it. Brennan understood that the moment of exposure mattered just as much as the evidence itself. Too early, and it would be contained. Too late, and the damage would already be done. That level of patience came at a cost. For 3 years, he lived in 2 realities. One where he was a son going through normal routines, school, friends, life moving forward, and another where he was quietly documenting the collapse of his own family. Carrying that kind of awareness at that age changes you. It forces you to grow faster than you should, to see things you're not ready to process, to hold on to information that doesn't have a place to go. And yet, he never lost focus. By the time he stood in that courtroom, holding that recorder in his hand, Brennan wasn't reacting to what had happened. He was completing something he had been building for 3 years. Every recording, every moment of silence, every decision not to speak had led to that point. He hadn't just uncovered the truth. He had preserved it. When Brennan pressed play again, the courtroom didn't just listen, it absorbed. What followed wasn't a single revelation but a sequence, each piece building on the last until the full weight of it became impossible to ignore. The next recording was clearer, longer, deliberate, in a way that left no room for interpretation. Genevieve's voice carried through the room with unsettling calm. "He doesn't suspect anything," she said. "Duncan's predictable. Work, home, repeat. By this time next year, I'll be free." A second voice followed, male, confident. Marshall Kendrick, the name Brennan had mentioned. The man I had never met but who had been present in my life for years without my knowledge. Their conversation wasn't emotional. It wasn't reckless. It was strategic. They spoke about timing, about waiting until Brennan turned 18 so custody wouldn't complicate the divorce. They spoke about the future, where they would go, what they would do, like everything we had built together was already behind them. The next recording cut deeper. "I moved another 20,000, Genevieve said, almost casually, "from the joint account. He won't notice. He never checks." The room shifted, not visibly, not dramatically, but the energy changed. This wasn't just betrayal anymore. It was calculation. Brennan didn't speak. He let the recordings do the work. One after another, they painted a picture that grew more complete and more disturbing with each passing second. Conversations about hidden accounts, about credit cards opened in my name, about a second mortgage I had never questioned closely enough. Amounts were mentioned, specifics, dates, transfers, not guesses, not vague accusations, evidence. "By the time this is over," Genevieve's voice said in another clip, "he'll be responsible for all the debt, the house, the loans, everything, and I'll walk away clean." Someone in the gallery exhaled sharply. No one looked away. But the worst was still coming. Brennan paused briefly before pressing play again. This time, the recording was different. Slower, measured, deliberate in a way that made it clear this wasn't just planning, it was preparation. "If he fights back," Genevieve said, "we use the abuse angle. I've already set it up." There was a faint rustle in the courtroom. Even Judge Whitmore leaned forward slightly. "Medical records?" Marshall asked. "Handled," she replied. "Photos, reports, everything. Dominique says it's solid. Once that's in play, the court will side with me. They always do." The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was heavy. She continued, "I've got statements lined up too. Friends who'll say they saw things, that he was controlling, aggressive. It doesn't have to be perfect. It just has to be believable." Believable. That was the word that settled hardest. Not truth, not reality. Believable. Brennan stopped the recording. He didn't need to play more. The damage had already reached a point where it couldn't be contained. Across the room, Genevieve was no longer composed. The confidence she had carried into the courtroom had collapsed completely. "That's not what it sounds like," she said quickly, her voice rising, uneven now. "Those conversations were private. They were taken out of context. You don't understand." "I understand exactly," Brennan said. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't need to. "You planned it," he continued. "The affair, the money, the accusations, all of it. You didn't just want a divorce, you wanted to leave with everything. And you were willing to lie to the court to make that happen." "No," she said, shaking her head, stepping back as if distance could undo what had already been heard. "No, this is wrong. This is illegal. You can't—" She stopped, because for the first time, there was nothing left to say. Her eyes moved around the room toward the judge, toward her lawyer, toward the door, and in that moment, something changed. Not in the evidence, that had already done its work, but in her understanding of what it meant. This wasn't a situation she could talk her way out of. This was exposure. Without warning, she turned and ran. It wasn't dramatic. It wasn't calculated. It was instinct. A sudden, desperate attempt to escape a reality that had closed in around her too quickly. Chairs scraped. Papers shifted. The movement broke the stillness like glass. She didn't make it far. The bailiff intercepted her within seconds, guiding her back with firm, controlled precision. "Ma'am, you need to return to your seat." "I didn't do anything," she said, her voice breaking now, the composure gone entirely. "This is a misunderstanding. He's lying, But even as she spoke, it was clear that no one believed it. Judge Whitmore's expression had changed completely. What had begun as a routine proceeding had transformed into something else entirely, something far more serious. "Mrs. Ashworth," she said, her voice measured but unmistakably firm, "based on what I've just heard, this court is no longer addressing a simple divorce matter." She paused, letting the weight of that settle. "This is now a matter that may involve criminal conduct." And just like that, the narrative shifted completely. What had been a carefully planned exit had become the beginning of a criminal case. The moment the final recording ended, the courtroom didn't return to silence. It collapsed into it. Not the ordinary quiet of a proceeding, but something heavier, as if every person in the room understood that what had just been revealed couldn't be undone. The air felt different, charged, irreversible. Brennan lowered the recorder slowly, his hand steady, his expression unchanged. He had done what he came to do. Now it was no longer his moment, it belonged to the court. Judge Whitmore didn't speak immediately. She remained still for a few seconds, her gaze fixed on the documents in front of her, then on Genevieve, then back to Brennan. When she finally spoke, her voice carried a weight that silenced even the smallest movement in the room. "Mr. Ashworth," she said, "those recordings, if verified, indicate not only marital misconduct but potential criminal behavior of a very serious nature." Genevieve shook her head rapidly, her composure unraveling in real time. No, that's not what this is," she said, her voice rising, fractured now, no longer controlled. "Those were private conversations. Hypothetical. People say things, they don't mean them. You can't take that and—" "Enough." The single word cut through everything. Judge Whitmore leaned forward, her expression no longer neutral, no longer patient. "What I have heard," she continued, "includes admissions of financial fraud, identity misuse, and a deliberate plan to present false evidence to this court. That is not hypothetical. That is not taken out of context. That is actionable." The room held its breath. Dominique Pryor, Genevieve's attorney, stood quickly, but even she seemed to recognize the shift. "Your Honor, we would request time to review the authenticity of these recordings before—" "You will have that opportunity," the judge replied, her tone firm, "but understand this. These proceedings are no longer limited to divorce. I am ordering an immediate review and referring this matter to the district attorney's office." That was the moment everything broke. Genevieve's face drained completely, her hands gripping the edge of the table, as if it were the only thing holding her in place. For a second, she looked around the room, not searching for answers, but for escape. And then, without warning, she moved. It wasn't calculated. It wasn't controlled. It was pure instinct. She turned and bolted. Her chair crashed backward, the sound sharp against the silence as she rushed toward the side exit, her heels striking the floor in uneven rhythm. It happened so quickly that for a fraction of a second, no one reacted. Then the bailiff moved, 3 strides. That was all it took. He caught her just before she reached the door, his grip firm but controlled as he pulled her back. "Ma'am, you need to stop." "Let go of me," she shouted, her voice breaking completely now. "This is a setup. He's lying. This whole thing is a lie." But even as she said it, the words carried no weight. Not anymore. She struggled, briefly, then stopped, not because she chose to, but because there was nowhere left to go. The room she had once walked into with confidence now felt like a trap closing in from every side. The bailiff guided her back to her seat. She didn't resist this time. Her hands trembled as she sat down, her breathing uneven, her composure gone. The polished exterior, the control, the certainty, all of it had disappeared, replaced by something raw and exposed. Judge Whitmore watched the entire exchange without interruption. When the room settled again, she spoke with measured clarity. "Mrs. Ashworth, your behavior has been noted, And based on the evidence presented today, this court has significant concerns regarding multiple potential violations, including fraud, forgery, perjury, and conspiracy to mislead this court. Each word landed with precision. I am ordering that this case be referred immediately for criminal investigation. These proceedings are adjourned pending further review. The gavel came down with a sharp final sound. But for me, the moment didn't feel like an ending. It felt like a realization, a slow, unavoidable understanding of how much had been hidden beneath the surface of a life I thought I understood. The months that followed moved quickly, but the impact of that day never faded. The investigation uncovered everything Brennan had already revealed, and more. Financial records confirmed the transfers. Documents verified the forged signatures. Witnesses who had been prepared to lie were confronted with evidence they couldn't deny. The case built itself, piece by piece, until there was nothing left to dispute. Genevieve was charged on multiple counts: fraud, forgery, identity theft, perjury. Charges that reflected not just what she had done, but how deliberately she had done it. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't a lapse in judgment. It was a pattern, a system. The trial was shorter than anyone expected. The evidence was too strong. When the verdict came, there was no surprise. Guilty on the majority of counts. The sentencing followed soon after. 8 years in state prison, with eligibility for parole after 5. I was there when the sentence was read. I watched as the reality of it settled over her, as the consequences of everything she had planned finally took shape in a way she couldn't escape. There was no satisfaction in it, no sense of victory, only a quiet understanding that the truth, once revealed, doesn't just change the outcome. It changes everything that came before it. What followed the courtroom collapse was not chaos, but process cold, methodical, and relentless. The district attorney's office moved quickly once the recordings were verified. Subpoenas were issued, financial institutions were contacted, and every transaction Brennan had captured in fragments was reconstructed into a complete, undeniable timeline. Bank records confirmed the transfers. Credit accounts revealed balances I had never authorized. Mortgage documents exposed signatures that looked like mine but weren't. What had sounded shocking in audio became irrefutable in writing. The investigation didn't stop with Genevieve. It expanded outward, pulling in everyone who had played a role in the scheme. The doctor who had produced falsified medical records was identified, questioned, and eventually charged. The friends who had agreed to provide false statements, people I had once welcomed into my home, were confronted with evidence of their involvement. Some cooperated, some denied. It didn't matter. The pattern was too clear, the documentation too precise. One by one, the structure they had built to support a lie collapsed under the weight of the truth. Genevieve's legal team attempted to negotiate, but there was little room left to maneuver. The charges were extensive: fraud, forgery, identity theft, perjury, conspiracy, and each carried its own consequences. In the end, the outcome was not shaped by argument, but by evidence. She was convicted on the majority of counts and sentenced accordingly. The courtroom, where she had once expected to secure everything, became the place where she lost it. The civil side of the case shifted just as dramatically. The original divorce settlement, the one designed to strip me of my assets, was voided entirely. Every claim she had made was re-examined under the light of what had been uncovered. The narrative she had tried to construct no longer held any credibility. Instead of gaining control, she forfeited it. The court awarded me the house, the majority of the remaining assets, and formal recognition of the financial losses I had sustained. Restitution orders were issued, ensuring that whatever could be recovered would be returned over time. On paper, it was a complete reversal. The outcome she had planned so carefully had turned against her in every possible way. But what stayed with me wasn't the legal victory. It was the clarity that came with it. For years, I had lived inside a version of reality shaped by trust that had been quietly manipulated, redirected, and ultimately used against me. The investigation didn't just expose what had happened. It dismantled the illusion that had allowed it to happen in the first place. When it was over, I wasn't left with the life I thought I had before. That life no longer existed, but I was left with something else, something more stable, more grounded in truth. The house was still mine. The future, uncertain as it was no longer built on deception. And for the first time in a long time, that was enough. Time did what time always does. It didn't erase what happened, but it reshaped how it lived inside me. The first few months after everything ended were the hardest, not because of what I had lost on paper, but because of what I had to relearn about my own life. For years, my identity had been tied to being a provider, a husband, a man who kept things steady no matter what. When that foundation collapsed, I had to figure out who I was without it. At first, the silence in the house felt heavy, almost unfamiliar, but slowly it changed. It became something quieter, more manageable, less like absence, and more like space. I made small adjustments at first. I reduced my hours at work, something I hadn't allowed myself to consider in decades. For the first time, I wasn't working to maintain a life built for someone else's expectations. I was working for myself. That shift, simple as it sounds, changed more than I expected. I started paying attention to things I had ignored for years: my health, my time, the simple routines that didn't revolve around obligation. Eventually, I sold the house. Not because I had to, but because I chose to. Too many memories, too many layers of a life that no longer existed. I moved into a smaller place, closer to the city, modern, clean, unfamiliar, in a way that felt necessary. It wasn't about starting over completely. It was about creating something that belonged entirely to me, without the weight of what had come before. Brennan, meanwhile, moved forward in a way that both reassured me and reminded me of everything he had carried. He started at Georgia Tech that fall, stepping into a life that looked, on the surface, like any other college experience. Classes, projects, new friends, late nights studying. But there was a quiet strength in him now, something shaped by everything he had gone through. He had seen more than most people his age, understood more than he should have needed to. And yet, he didn't let it define him. We talked every week, sometimes about school, sometimes about nothing important at all. Those conversations mattered more than anything else. They felt normal, and after everything, normal was something I had learned to appreciate in a way I never had before. He made the dean's list, secured an internship, started building a future that was entirely his own. Watching that happen gave me something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not relief exactly, but certainty. He was going to be okay. Better than okay. As for me, I started allowing small pieces of life back in. Nothing dramatic, just gradual steps. Conversations with new people. Occasional dinners. The kind of moments that don't demand anything, don't promise anything, but remind you that life doesn't end just because something breaks. It changes, and if you let it, it rebuilds. What I came to understand over time is that recovery isn't about returning to who you were before. That version of you doesn't exist anymore. Recovery is about becoming someone who can carry what happened without being defined by it. Someone who understands loss, but isn't controlled by it. Brennan grew into someone stronger because of what he faced. And I learned how to live again differently, more carefully, but also more honestly than I ever had before. In the end, what stayed with me wasn't the courtroom, the verdict, or even the betrayal itself. It was the truth. Not the kind of true dummy, but the kind that breaks through everything you thought you understood and forces you to see clearly, whether you're ready or not. For years, I had been living inside an illusion, one built on trust that was never questioned, and a reality that was carefully controlled without my knowledge. It felt stable, familiar, even safe. But it wasn't real. And when that illusion shattered, it hurt in a way I can't fully put into words. Still, what replaced it, painful as it was something solid, something honest. The truth doesn't protect you from loss. It doesn't soften the impact of what's been done. But it does something more important: it gives you clarity. It removes doubt. It ends the quiet confusion of sensing something is wrong but not knowing why. And in that clarity, there is a kind of freedom that only comes when you are no longer being misled, no longer questioning your own reality. What I learned is simple, but not easy to accept. Truth will always surface eventually. It may take time. It may require patience, evidence, and the courage to face what you don't want to see. But it cannot stay hidden forever. And when it does come out, it doesn't just expose others, it reveals who you are in the face of it. I lost a version of my life I believed in. But in losing it, I gained something more valuable: a life grounded in reality, not illusion. And that, in the end, is what allowed me to move forward. Because freedom isn't found in comfort or denial. It's found in the truth.